Welcome back to another episode in our ongoing series on Japanese music theory. If you haven't seen those videos yet, you can find them here. Let's jump in and answer these questions today. How did the Shakuhachi scale develop? Why is the Shakuhachi scale different from the scales used in Shomyo and Hitoyogiri? Why do we use the Miyako Bushi scale? And lastly, does Shakuhachi have modes too? Great questions. But before we get into it, I want to thank my friend Nick Belando at Hon On Shakuhachi, link below, for allowing me to use some of his research to help make this video. Also, thanks for collaborating with me today and providing your skillful shakuhachi playing. At the end of this video, we will go over and explain why this is important to us in our exploration of the relationship of Shomyo to shakuhachi. Stay tuned for today's conclusion. As we proceed, please bear in mind that while we are using modern Western musical terms to refer to pitches, the pitches played on the Hitoyogiri or on older shakuhachi can be roughly a quarter tone to a half tone lower. History. In the first two videos of this series, we talked about scales. Specifically, we talked about some of the scales like Inaka Bushi and Miyako Bushi. We also talked about Tsu and Ryo scales in the second video. However, we haven't yet talked about the unique scale of the shakuhachi and how it developed. So, let's start with our first question. How did the shakuhachi scale develop? This is central to our topic of connecting the three disciplines of Shomyo, Hitoyogiri, and shakuhachi. And to be very clear, we want to emphasize that this is a subject within Japanese music history and theory in which much remains hazy or vague. So you can find opinions that differ greatly. This is due large in part to the fact that recording technology existed only in more recent history. Before that, a lot of guesswork was and still is involved. So this is a subject with Japanese music history and theory on which no one agrees.
I like turtles.
That's right. So what I'm presenting today is only one theoretical position. However, I believe that this position is the strongest. In reality, there are truths in all positions, but to be concise and to keep it simple, we will discuss this particular position today. As we learned in the Shomyo and Hitoyogiri videos, they are using 5 modes. To give a little spoiler, shakuhachi also employs 5 modes, but we will get to that later. The modes in Shomyo and in Hitoyogiri are as follows: Oshiki, A, Sojo, G, Banshiki, B, Ichikotsu, D, and Hyojo, E. These 5 modes also contain their respective Tsu and or Ryo modalities as well. Setting aside the nuances of Ryo and Tsu for a moment, let's listen to the Tsu scale played on the Hitoyogiri in the Oshiki mode, the root note with all holes being closed, as A, and then on the shakuhachi with the root note as D, Ichikotsu. You may notice that this sounds different from the bare Minyo scale of DFGAC that we are used to hearing, as well as from the scales that we're used to hearing in modern Honkyoku. Here is the Tsu scale next to the Minyo scale for comparison. Modern Honkyoku, though, are still based on the Tsu scale, but it starts on Rei, that is, on the note G, giving us the Sojo mode. If we use the same relative scale, meaning the same position on the Hitoyogiri, the root note is D, the Ichikotsu mode, which was used to play folk music as well. So this may sound confusing, but I promise as we get through this video, things will become more clear. To help clear this up, let's hear them both. Now let's hear it on the shakuhachi starting on Rei or G. In the same scale again, but starting from Ro. Now we're getting closer to what we use in Honkyoku. Are you starting to recognize it? But wait, you may say, the Tsu still sounds wrong. Okay, understood, but not so fast. We aren't playing Tsu as you're used to hearing it. In the Kari position, resulting as an F natural. Rather, we are dropping the note in a light midi position, giving us an E natural. On many older flutes, this is done with little to no effort, with no hole shading. This has been a long-time critique of myoan players. Why don't they play the E flat properly? They're playing it too sharp. Well, the answer is they're not trying to play E flat. However, there is another point which needs to be addressed in tandem with E flat. That is, where is the A flat, or the U note? The A flat is also seen in the shakuhachi scale that we're used to hearing. Let's hang out on that A flat for a little bit. Though we can't be 100% certain, it seems that this note has its origins in the classical repertoire of the Hitoyogiri. In the Hitoyogiri, there is another fingering called Ru, think U on the shakuhachi, which has several functions, acting as a tone color effect or as a blue note. I like to call this note the emotion-bearing note. In the present mode, this gives us the note E flat on the Hitoyogiri or A flat on the shakuhachi. Listen to the Ru note on the Hitoyogiri with an added short excerpt. So we don't naturally add this into the scale when it comes to shakuhachi or Hitoyogiri. Rather, this is an additional note that is added in for color effect. In Hitoyogiri, the Ru is a bit of a mystery, as it can be played in several iterations, all with a range of pitches. However, we do know that it was sometimes used to play such a halftone. If you listen to old-style myoan players playing honte choshi, you will hear this in the chi-chi-u phrase. This blue note is not really a part of the scale. It simply finds its way in there from time to time as an expression of color, an expression of light and dark. So the basic scale used in old-style honkyoku ends up like this. Notice that in this scale, it contains both F and E natural pitches on the shakuhachi. This is a key point for the scale that we will mention later. So let's take a quick listen to the chi-chi-u phrase in the classical style from Choshi. Now let's hear it in the modern style for comparison. There is something else that tends to happen in the scale, however. Ro and Rei represent the bass and nuclear tones of the scale, and are very stable. We noted these as stopping tones in previous videos. The Tsu and Chi position represent transitional notes, and these tend to bend and flex within the scale, much like in Shomyo and in Hitoyogiri. Tsu can be played in a kari position, when rising towards Rei, and in a midi position when descending towards Ro. Chi can behave likewise. Ergo, in the above scale, the ascending pattern gives us the F natural, and descending we hear E natural. But it's not to be understood that in all descending passages or ascending passages you will hear an F and E respectively. Depending on the piece and musical phrase, sometimes you will hear the Chi in the kari position, giving us an A natural, and in other times it will be played in the midi position, giving us the A flat, or at least something slightly lower than A. Also, utilizing the same fingering. But what we want to highlight here is that the usage of tone color is very similar, if not the same, across the Hitoyogiri repertoire and the early Shakuhachi repertoire, as played by old-style players such as Tanikita Muchiku, Kobayashi Shizan, Yoshimura Soshin, and others. The descending and ascending variations don't mean that they must be descending when playing a passage going down or vice versa. Rather, it is just a way to think of the notes as they appear systematically. There are a variety of phrases within honkyoku that utilize the A-flat position going up and down, as well as the A natural position going up and down. These pitches should be thought of more in terms of tone color, that is, light and dim, yin and yang, or even as the name Myowan suggests, bright and dark. When you play on old flutes, the chi is sharp, and must be played in a bit of a medi position to get the A as a default. Likewise, the Tsu is played in a slight medi position to get the E, though old flutes tend to have the Tsu a bit lower than modern ones do. This is all done with the breath, without shading holes, just as in Hitoyogiri. Also, important to note that classical flutes have smaller holes. So even though we play Rotsure Chi-ri as D-E-G-A-C, Chi and Tsu are played medi. Not medi in pitch, but physically medi, bringing the blowing angle down slightly. Like Ru on the Hitoyogiri, the U fingering carries some mystery with it, as it can be played at the pitch of Chi, the pitch of Re, or somewhere in between. There will be some variation between players on the same piece, or even between iterations of a single player's interpretation of it. Do you have a headache yet? We do. Back to the content. Nevertheless, the old-style honkyoku scale played on an old shakuhachi using the plain Ritsu scale is played so that Tsu and Chi are the pitches E and A natural, when in a medi position. Additionally, we have the blue note between G and A, represented by the fingering U or by the occasional Chi Meri. If you are following how our scale is developing, you can probably see that we are getting closer to the Miyako Bushi scale now. The Miyako Bushi scale came into fashion in the later half of the Edo era, beginning in the late 1700s. Rather than being an accidental aspect of the scale, the halftones represented by Tsumeri and Chimeri or U came to be featured as a part of the scale itself. As the common people, particularly in urban areas, Miyako Bushi means literally urban scale, became more and more accustomed to hearing the Miyako Bushi scale, it makes sense that it would have begun to seep into the shakuhachi player's honkyoku as well. Chi and Tsu are already played medi and with the blowing angle. Play them a little bit more medi, and you get those halftones, E flat and A flat, that you are used to hearing the shamisen players and singers sing at bars. And besides, the A flat was already there at times, just lower that Tsu a bit. Nick's grand teacher, Toyo Deiko, writes the following, quote, "The first hole on old style Kyuhan Wari Shakuhachi is low, so it's easy to produce Tsu Chu Medi, E, and Medi, E flat. However, for shakuhachi players used to playing Yosen, Inakabushi Honkyoku, Tsumeri isn't used very much, and being unaccustomed to it, their Meri doesn't go down all the way. Players who learned Gaikyoku in Kinko-ryu and Tozan-ryu would say those Honkyokus can't play Tsumeri. We should also consider that while some komuso were simply playing and begging alms as shugyo and aesthetic practice, others found that they didn't take kindly to being coerced into parting with their money by music that was sometimes not very pleasant to listen to. The kinkos, even though it was technically forbidden by law, would earn their living by teaching lay people to play. Riley Lee notes this in his thesis. At first, teaching was done in the temples themselves, but as the sex restrictions regarding the teaching and townspeople were lessened, outside teaching locations were established. Whatever the reason for their establishment, the number of these locations, also called fukiawase or fukiawase-jo, literally blowing together places, increased, so that by 1792, according to a response to yet another government inquiry, 19 persons were listed as living in houses in Edo and teaching shakuhachi. If they are teaching people and playing so as to attract students, it makes sense that they would adapt their playing to what people enjoyed listening to. Simply put, Miyako Bushi makes money, and for many, charging money for a service, giving lessons, might have been preferable to begging. It's difficult to say just how and when it occurred, but it seems that around the latter half of the Edo era, or perhaps a bit earlier, at least, by the early 1900s, shakuhachi honkyoku began to fork, and with one direction being of that of the Inaka Bushi, or the rural scale, still used today by many Myowan and Fuke players, and the other being that of the Miyako Bushi, or urban scale, used by those who play honkyoku as a performing art or as professional musicians. Of course, there are plenty of people who don't fit neatly into either category, but the general existence of these two modes of playing is clear to see. But let's get back to scales and modes, and try to clarify a few points. We just discussed how the older honkyoku scale in some cases seems to have morphed into the Miyako Bushi scale that most people associate with honkyoku today. First of all, let's review the older Inaka Bushi or rural scale and the Miyako Bushi or urban scale. Miyako Bushi scale. Now, before we hear some examples of pieces and style, let's review what we've covered so far. 1. How did the shakuhachi scale develop? It began on the Hitoyogiri shakuhachi, at least as early as the 1400s and 1500s, borrowed from the Gagaku and Shomyo worlds, whose scales strongly influenced those of larger and more tonally versatile Fuke shakuhachi that gained popularity during the Edo era, eventually overshadowing the former. Next, why is the shakuhachi scale different from the Shomyo and the Hitoyogiri? While the Hitoyogiri requires a bit more understanding of Gagaku theory with respect to the way tones shift in different modalities, many players appear not to have been trained in music theory. So even though the Hitoyogiri lost some of its nuances with techniques growing simpler and simpler over time. We can see this through publications of the Hitoyogiri in early Edo era, starting with Omori Sokun's original works, to Dosho Kyoku, and then to Ikanobori. The shakuhachi was often played by people who were not professional musicians. While the Gagaku influence waned, a more embodied, nuanced natural seems to have found its way into the shakuhachi, based on the Hitoyogiri scales and influenced by the Fuke shakuhachi's construction. Playing on the Fuke shakuhachi might be said to be influenced more by the player and the flute than by music theory. Next, why do we use the Miyako Bushi scale? Though there is no way to prove this with absolute certainty, it is likely due to some influence by Kurosawa Kinko and or their successors, who made a living teaching shakuhachi to lay people, as well as performing honkyoku. Since people were used to hearing the Miyako Bushi scale, playing something they would like made sense. Now on to our last question, which we have but haven't answered. Does shakuhachi have modes too? Yes, they are akebono, ro, yugure, tsu, honchoshi, re, okiri, chi, kumoi, ri. An easy way to think of them is to consider each hole as a starting pitch, ro, tsu, re, chi, ri. I'm going to give you each mode and how to play them, and Nick and I will also play a short excerpt to give you an example of how each one sounds different than the others. I will use the Miyako Bushi influenced E-flat, A-flat versions, and Nick Belando will use the Myowan E natural versions with the movable chi. Let's begin with Honchoshi. Myowan. Kinko. A ton of pieces contain this mode, and arguably the bulk of shakuhachi music is centered around this mode. I don't think there's a better piece to use as an example than this than Honchoshi. I will play a modern version and Nick will play an old style version of the following. Names for this piece include Hontechoshi, Honshirabe, Takeshirabe, Hontecho, Honkyoku Choshi, Honkyoku no Choshi, Nyoichi Choshi, Myowan Choshi, Rakuyo Choshi, and Kyo Choshi, and so on and so forth. These pieces may be played as preludes, maebuki, to honkyoku like koku, or during ceremonial ensemble performances. Despite its simplicity, it contains all the essential elements, making it complex due to its straightforwardness. Listen to the lines from the following excerpt back to back. Yugure. Here's how it sounds on the old version. So how come I am not playing an example of this? Well, the reason why is because it actually doesn't work to shift this over to the modern Miyako Bushi scale. There is some reasonings why, but it's too complicated to get into here. And, well, why is there no piece example? Well, there's another complicated answer for that too, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Next is akebono. Let's listen to the piece example, Sanya. Next, let's hear kumoi. On this piece, we're going to listen to kumoi jishi. Kumoi jishi is a shakuhachi koten honkyoku, a type of shishimono, also known as kumoi no kyoku, which was actively played at Ichoken in Hakata, particularly in the Kyushu region. In Yokkaichi, Mie Prefecture, a kagura lion dance flute tune is called kai-kyoku. It accompanies a performance featuring two lion figures enacting a courtesan's parade. When transposed to a 1.4 shakuhachi in the kumoi scale, it is called kumoi shishi. In the most commonly played rendition, Higuchi Taizan later adds a prelude and postlude parts, naming it kumoi no kyoku. In Kyushu, Komuso monks played this tune at funerals and memorial services. Its offerings were inadequate. If the offerings were inadequate, compelling hosts to comply to avoid embarrassment. The tune's vigorous and noisy nature led to its nickname, Yabugarashi, bush killer, and it's also known as akebono shishi or futakami shishi in the Ichoken tradition. okiri. So this one, I also don't give a modern example of it, and I also don't have a piece example for it. The reason why we didn't give piece examples for yugure and okiri is because they don't exist, at least as far as Nick and I are aware. Rather, these modes were possibly used for the following reason. Hey Shakuhachi friend, I have my 1.8 Shakuhachi with me. Do you want to play a piece? Aw shoot, all I have is my 2.1 with me. How can we ever play together? Oh, I know, I will play my 1.8 in akebono, and you can play yours in yugure, and we can share the same pitch. Oh, that's a fantastic idea. So there you have it. The reason why those modes exist is because, well, people might want to have played with each other. Let's wrap it all up now. Conclusion. In this exploration of the modes of shakuhachi, we delve deeply into the unique scales, its historical development, and the nuanced mode that characterized its rich musical tradition. We began by tracing the origins of shakuhachi scales, noting its connection to the Hitoyogiri, and the influence of Shomyo, while acknowledging the complexities and uncertainties that shroud this historical journey. The shakuhachi scale's evolution highlights its instrument's versatility and adaptability, influenced by both musical traditions and the practicalities of use it's by the komuso and lay people alike. Understanding the differences between the shakuhachi scale and those used in Shomyo and Hitoyogiri is crucial. The Hitoyogiri's simpler techniques and the shakuhachi's evolution into a more nuanced instrument reflect a broader trends in Japanese music, where theoretical knowledge and embodied practice intersects. The shakuhachi's development was also shaped by social and cultural factors, such as the urbanization of music and the need for komuso to attract lay students. The adoption of the Miyako Bushi scale in the shakuhachi repertoire further exemplifies this adaptability. Influences from urban musical preferences and the practicalities of earning a livelihood through teaching and performing helped shape the modern honkyoku we recognize today. The Miyako Bushi scale's integration demonstrates how external cultural and economic pressures can influence musical evolution, merging traditional practices with contemporary taste. Finally, we explored the modes of the shakuhachi, each providing a distinct tonal color and emotional expression. These modes, akebono, yugure, honchoshi, okiri, and kumoi, offer a framework for understanding the instrument's diverse repertoire and expressive capabilities. Each mode's distinct sounds and the flexibility of pitch and tone color, particularly through the use of many and kari techniques, illustrates the shakuhachi's unique place in Japanese music. As we continue to explore the shakuhachi, it becomes evident that its music is not just about notes and scales, but about the subtle interplay of history, culture, and personal expression. Through this series, we hope to deepen our appreciation for the shakuhachi and its profound impact on Japanese musical heritage. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we look forward to continuing our exploration of Japanese music theory in future episodes.